When small-town mechanic Tom Weaver walked into Briar Ridge Police Station and calmly confessed to the brutal murder of journalist Eli Parker, everyone thought justice had arrived. But Detective Rachel Kincaid couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As she dug deeper, she uncovered a web of lies reaching into the powerful hands of Mark Halden, a respected construction magnate with ties to the town's leadership. In a place where truth was for sale and silence was survival, one false confession would expose how far corruption could go, and how easily an innocent man could be sacrificed to protect the guilty. The morning mist over Lake Halden was thick enough to swallow sound. It rolled across the glassy surface, turning everything pale and ghost-like. Around 7 o'clock, a jogger named Michael Dorsey slowed his pace near the water's edge, his breath visible in the cold air. That was when he noticed something pale caught in the reeds. At first he thought it was a mannequin, the kind that sometimes washed up from the nearby junkyard after heavy rain. But as he moved closer, the stillness of it felt wrong. It wasn't a mannequin. It was a man. The police arrived within 20 minutes. By then the sun had begun to rise, turning the mist into thin ribbons of gold. The victim's body lay half submerged, one arm stretched toward the water as if reaching for something that was no longer there. The officers moved carefully, documenting every detail before pulling him onto the shore. His name, discovered from a wallet in his back pocket, was Eli Parker, 29 years old, a freelance photographer who had moved to Briar Ridge just 2 months earlier. At first glance, it looked like a drowning, but the bruises told another story. Dark rings around the neck, a split lip, and scratches on his arms that suggested a fight. His camera, the one piece of equipment that defined his life, was missing. The police searched his car, found parked just down the dirt road. It was unlocked, keys still dangling from the ignition. Nothing seemed stolen except the camera. His phone was there, but the last messages showed no sign of danger, just reminders, weather alerts, and an unfinished text that read only, "He saw me again," before cutting off. News of the discovery spread quickly through Briar Ridge, a small town tucked between forests and old mining roads. People gathered along the police tape, whispering theories. Some thought it was an accident. Others spoke of drifters, criminals passing through. But beneath the curiosity there was fear, because nothing violent ever happened there, not for years. The investigation began that same afternoon. Detectives combed through Eli's apartment, a small space above a closed bookstore. His walls were lined with photographs, sunsets, street corners, empty fields. Most were ordinary, but a few stood out. They were strange, taken at odd angles with titles like "The Eyes That Watch" and "Someone Is Always There." None showed faces. They only captured reflections, in puddles, in mirrors, in the glass of abandoned windows. It was as if he'd been documenting something or someone who didn't want to be seen. The coroner confirmed strangulation as the cause of death. It wasn't quick. The marks suggested a struggle lasting several minutes. Whoever killed Eli had been close enough to look him in the eye as the life left his body. By evening, the lake was deserted again. The jogger who found the body went home and scrubbed his hands for hours. But the smell of lake water wouldn't leave. Across town, the detective assigned to the case stared at Eli's last photograph, an image of the lake, taken from the same spot where he died. 2 weeks passed before the police heard the creak of the front doors at the Briar Ridge station and saw a man step inside. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. His hair was unwashed, his eyes bloodshot. His name was Tom Weaver, a 32-year-old mechanic who lived near the old boathouse by Lake Halden. He walked up to the front desk, trembling slightly, and said he needed to talk to someone about the murder. The officers exchanged looks before leading him to an interview room. Tom's hands shook as he signed the intake form. Without hesitation, he began to confess. He said he had killed Eli Parker. The words came out flat like a memorized line. He claimed it had happened late one night near the lake. He said he'd been trying to break into cars to steal spare parts to sell. According to him, Eli had caught him in the act, confronted him, and tried to take his picture as proof. Tom said he panicked, lunged at him, and in the struggle his hands closed around Eli's throat. When it was over, he left the body by the water and ran home. Every word matched certain details from the police report. The bruises, the position of the body, even the missing camera. He seemed to know it all. The lead detective at the time, Captain Avery, thought the case had solved itself. A confession like this, so thorough and specific, was rare. They photographed Tom, fingerprinted him, and logged the confession. He never once asked for a lawyer or denied what he'd done. He just kept saying he was tired and that he wanted everything to stop. To the public, it seemed like justice had come swiftly. Newspapers called it the Lake Halden murder solved. Reporters published photos of Tom's small workshop, his rusted truck parked outside, and stories about his quiet life. Neighbors described him as polite but withdrawn, someone who kept to himself and rarely spoke. No one could picture him as a killer, but that only added to the intrigue. The confession was taken as proof of guilt rather than doubt. Behind the scenes, though, a few officers felt uneasy. Tom's story had a strange precision, as if it had been rehearsed. When asked simple follow-up questions, what kind of car he'd been breaking into, or what Eli had shouted during the fight, his answers faltered. Sometimes he'd contradict himself. Other times he'd go silent for long stretches, staring at the floor. He cried once, but not when describing the killing, only when they mentioned the lake. Despite the doubts, the paperwork moved fast. A signed confession and matching details were enough for the prosecutor. Tom Weaver was charged with second-degree murder and transferred to the county jail. As he was led away in handcuffs, he didn't struggle. He only turned his head toward the window that faced the lake and whispered something no one could hear. Outside, the clouds hung low over the water, still and heavy, as if the lake itself knew a secret it wasn't ready to give up. The weeks leading up to the trial were filled with unease. Briar Ridge, once quiet and forgotten, buzzed with gossip. Every conversation in the diners and small-town bars circled back to Tom Weaver. Some believed he was guilty beyond question. Others whispered that he didn't have it in him. The confession was all anyone needed to convince themselves, yet something about it didn't sit right with those who looked closer. Detective Rachel Kincaid, newly assigned to the case as a secondary investigator, couldn't ignore the inconsistencies. She spent nights combing through files that most had already stopped reading. Tom's account of the murder didn't match the physical evidence. He had said Eli fell near the waterline, but the body had been found several feet away, dragged across the mud. He mentioned a flashlight dropping into the lake, but divers never found one. His timeline placed the murder at nearly midnight, yet Eli's phone activity stopped 2 hours earlier. Rachel visited Tom's workplace, a small auto garage off Route 6. The owner confirmed that Tom had been there until after midnight, repairing a delivery van. Several co-workers backed that story. None had seen him leave early. It didn't prove innocence, but it fractured the neat narrative that the confession had built. Meanwhile, Eli's missing camera became the focus of the investigation. Without it, the motive remained unclear. The police assumed Tom took it, yet no trace was ever found in his home, his workshop, or anywhere he had gone. It was as if the camera had vanished along with the truth. The breakthrough came unexpectedly when a farmer discovered an old metal case near an abandoned farmhouse about 10 miles from the lake. Inside was the missing camera, its battery dead, but the memory card still intact. The local police turned it over to Rachel, who spent hours reviewing the photographs one by one. The first few were harmless: sunsets, wildlife, derelict buildings. Then, deeper into the sequence, the images shifted. Eli had been taking photos of shadows. Silhouettes appeared on the edges of frames, a tall figure in work overalls, a reflective vest, and on one sleeve a patch reading Briar Ridge Construction Company. In several photos, the figure appeared to be following him, always in the background, always half hidden. The final photo, time-stamped the evening before Eli's death, showed the lake at dusk. In the reflection of the water stood the same figure, facing the camera. When Rachel cross-referenced the company name, she found that Briar Ridge Construction had been involved in several projects near the lake over the past few years. Among its executives was Mark Halden, brother of the town's mayor and one of the most influential men in the county. Rachel's report raised alarms within the department. Her supervisors told her to drop that line of inquiry, claiming it had no relevance to the case. But she couldn't. Tom's confession was unraveling, and now the thread led toward someone powerful, someone the town didn't want to question. Still, the trial went on as planned. Tom's written words outweighed every doubt. The courtroom lights were bright, the air tense, and in the back row, Rachel sat silently with the camera card in her pocket, realizing that the truth was far bigger and far darker than anyone wanted to believe. The trial began on a cold morning, the kind where the fog refused to lift and the courthouse steps glistened with dew. Reporters crowded outside, their cameras flashing each time the door opened. Inside, the air felt heavy, as if the building itself knew the weight of the story about to unfold. Tom Weaver sat quietly at the defense table, wearing a wrinkled shirt and a distant stare. He barely reacted when the charges were read aloud. The words second-degree murder echoed off the walls, yet he looked almost relieved to hear them. The prosecution wasted no time presenting their case. They built it around the confession, reading every line aloud for the jury. They showed photos of Eli Parker's body, the bruises, the fingerprints. They emphasized how Tom had described the exact location, the position of the corpse, and even small details only the killer could have known. To the jury, it seemed airtight. The prosecutor called him methodical, detached, and guilt-ridden. They painted the confession as an act of conscience, a man too burdened by guilt to hide his crime any longer. The defense attorney, a tired man appointed by the court, did little to fight it. He mentioned Tom's exhaustion, his unstable mental state, and his long-standing insomnia, but he offered no alternative theory. He didn't even mention the inconsistencies Rachel had discovered or the camera she had turned over for review. When Rachel pressed him after the first day in private, he admitted quietly that the court had ruled the camera evidence inadmissible due to chain of custody concerns. It was clear that someone didn't want that memory card discussed. As the days passed, Rachel felt her frustration growing. The story being told inside the courtroom was too simple, too convenient. Tom never looked angry, never pleaded for innocence. He just sat there, his expression hollow. When the prosecutor showed photos of Eli smiling beside the lake, the same lake where his body had been found, Tom didn't even flinch. Then, on the fourth day, something strange happened. During a recess, Rachel reviewed the case file one more time and noticed a set of photographs attached to the autopsy report that she hadn't seen before. In one image on Eli's wrist, there was a faint bruise shaped like a ring, a heavy square-cut type often worn by men in formal positions. Tom didn't own any jewelry, but she knew who did. Mark Halden, the construction executive she had connected to the camera images, wore an identical ring. Rachel requested to testify, but the court denied her. The prosecutor claimed her information was unverified and unrelated. She realized then that the system was protecting someone. Tom's confession was a shield, a convenient story to close the case and bury the truth. By the end of the week, the jury returned their verdict. They found Tom Weaver guilty. The judge sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. He didn't react. He simply stood, nodded once, and allowed himself to be led away. As the courtroom emptied, Rachel remained seated. She could hear the faint sound of rain starting outside, tapping against the windows. In her pocket, she still carried the copy of the final photograph from the camera, the reflection in the lake, the man with the construction patch, and that unmistakable glint of a ring catching the dying light. It was proof that the wrong man had just been condemned, but she also knew that proof alone meant nothing in a town where truth could be bought, buried, or silenced forever. Months passed after the conviction, yet the weight of the case refused to fade. Briar Ridge returned to its calm routine, but the quiet felt artificial, like a surface stretched too tightly over something festering underneath. People spoke less about Eli Parker's death and more about the so-called justice that followed. The sheriff's office moved on to new cases, and the media stopped visiting once the story stopped selling papers. Only Rachel Kincaid couldn't let go. The image from that memory card haunted her every night, the reflection in the lake, the faint glint of the ring, and the shadow that wasn't Tom Weaver's. She filed 3 internal reports demanding a review of the evidence, each rejected without explanation. Supervisors stopped returning her calls. One afternoon, she found her access to the case files revoked. It was clear someone wanted her out of the way. The following week, she was transferred to another district, an apparent routine reassignment. She didn't protest. Instead, she began her own investigation, quietly and off the record. Rachel drove to the edge of Lake Halden, the same place where Eli Parker's life had ended. The shoreline was calm, still scarred by the police dig marks from months ago. While walking along the edge, she noticed something metallic sticking from the mud. A small, rusted piece of construction equipment stamped with the same company name, Briar Ridge Construction Co. The date printed on it matched the day before Eli's death. It wasn't proof, but it deepened the suspicion that Eli had stumbled onto something involving that company, and paid for it with his life. Through late-night research, Rachel uncovered that Eli had been writing an article before he died, exposing illegal dumping by the construction company into the lake, toxic waste, unreported shipments, and falsified safety documents. It was enough to ruin reputations and cost millions. Eli's missing camera hadn't been about random photos. It was evidence. And if the photos had captured one of the company's leaders, the motive for murder was no longer a mystery. Rachel tracked down one of the company's former employees, a foreman who had quit shortly after the incident. The man was terrified even to speak, but his guilt broke through his fear. He admitted that Mark Halden had been at the lake that night, arguing with Eli over the photos. He also confessed that when Tom Weaver was arrested, Halden made a large donation to the sheriff's department within days. Armed with this information, Rachel went to the state authorities. It took months of persistence, but eventually a quiet investigation was launched. It was slow, cautious, and hidden from the town's leadership. When it concluded, the results shocked everyone. The forensic report proved that the mud and fibers on Eli's jacket matched samples found near the construction site, not Tom's workshop. The case was reopened. 2 years after his conviction, Tom Weaver was exonerated. The confession that once sealed his fate was proven coerced, signed after 40 hours without rest, food, or legal counsel. He walked out of prison a free man, though not a whole one. Reporters called it a tragic miscarriage of justice. Mark Halden was later found dead in his office, an apparent suicide before he could be charged. The scandal crushed the town's reputation, and Briar Ridge Construction collapsed overnight. Rachel left law enforcement soon after. On her final day, she returned once more to Lake Halden. The water rippled quietly under the fading sunset, its surface calm but deceptive. She dropped the final photograph, the reflection of the man with the ring, into the water and watched it drift away. Justice had come, but too late for one man's peace and another's life. The truth, she realized, was never simple. It could be hidden, silenced, even confessed to by the wrong man, but it never truly disappeared.